Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with a name known well in both the fresh and the saltwater, the founder of All Water Guides. This is my conversation with Alvin Dedeaux. All right, so I gave you the rundown. Is there anything else, any questions you have before we start?
Nope.
Cool. So I got Mr. Alvin Dedeaux in the chair today. And this one's kind of exciting because I've been wanting to do it for a while. I'm glad that we finally got together with the Howler store.
Yeah.
With that being said, would you like to give a brief introduction before we kind of get into it?
Okay, so I'm Alvin Dedeaux. You said it correctly. It could be Dedeaux, it could be Dedeaux, but it's kind of like in Texas, we like to mispronounce things. And so that's how we pronounce it in Texas. I'm an old dude now. I'm 61. I've been fly fishing since I was 12. I live in Austin, Texas now, grew up in Houston, Texas, and I've been fishing ever since I remember, before I can remember anything, I was fishing. And I've been real lucky to just turn fishing into my life, basically. It's what I do for fun, and it's also how I pay my bills and support my family. So I consider myself not unfortunately. Fortunately, I consider myself very lucky to be in the situation I'm in right now.
Perfect. Well, the first question I like to run with is run me through your first memory in the outdoors and then kind of your progression as an outdoorsman, kind of like in terms of like that first day and then maybe like some stories as you grew up and found yourself fly fishing at the age of 12. But I'm trying to start from the very beginning.
Man, the very beginning, like I said, I've been fishing ever since I was a kid. Yeah. So, I used to fish with my mom's parents, my grandmother and grandfather. I was too young. My dad was really like a really big family. He was 12 out of 13 kids. Mm-hmm. So by the time I was born, his dad was much older. And so I met him when I was a kid. But, my dad's dad built wooden fishing boats and made fishing nets, from scratch. So my dad grew up on the coast hunting and fishing. So basically that's how I grew up. Like I said, I don't remember a time when I wasn't fishing. My dad and his two brothers lived in Houston and they all hunted and fished. So between the three of them, somebody always had a boat. So we were always fishing. Memories, I have memories of being on the water, just random stuff as long as I can remember. But I do remember one particular incident when I was fishing with my grandparents, who, like my mom's parents, who both were just deadly with the cane pole. And my grandmother, and I don't know, this was I must have been 5 or 6 maybe, but I remember my grandmother catching this huge gar on her cane pole. And it was just it was so wild, because usually they're catching bass and little panfish and stuff. But my grandmother caught this huge gar. And I remember pulling it in and it was like, oh my God, what is that thing? It was just ferocious. And so, that really stood out. That was one of the first times where I was like, this isn't just fun, but it's super exciting and cool and maybe kind of dangerous too, because that thing had teeth and all that stuff. So that one, and then just have all kinds of random memories before 12, because 12 was when I got the fly rod. Just being out with my dad, falling in the water, almost getting sucked out into the ocean once. Oof. I remember my dad and I were sitting on this embankment at the coast. I don't remember where, and some big boat goes by, like a tugboat or something, and we're sitting on this embankment. And the wave from the tugboat comes in and hits the embankment where we are. My feet get wet and I kind of scoot back a little bit and my feet were wet and I just slid in. And right when I slid in, the wave was going back out. I guess we were fishing in some inlet, the wave was going back out and I start getting sucked out to sea. And I remember super vividly because my dad had to jump in and grab me and he was drinking a cocktail. And I remember as he was
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself preparing for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a visit at www.gordyandsons.com.
Dragging me back to shore, I remember seeing his cocktail glass floating out to sea. I was like, dang, he lost his drink.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So it's just like crazy little bits and pieces like that, but just always on the water. Mm-hmm. And, or I remember duck hunting with my dad and this one uncle, my Uncle Jules, who just had his 87th birthday the other day. I remember duck hunting with those guys, and, they were probably 30 something at the time, so they were pretty young dudes. And I just remember as a kid just kind of being like, I don't know how safe I feel with these guys with these guns and all this beer they're drinking. Just like now I think like, yeah, that
sounds like fun.
Yeah, I know. But I just remember like, but when I got that first fly rod for my 12th birthday, I had like lots of memories after that because, it was like, that was like
the first probably.
Yeah, it was a total like inflection point. And after I got the fly rod totally just like read about it in a book at school and told my parents I wanted a fly rod for my 12th birthday. I didn't know anybody that fly fished. I'd never seen anybody fly fish. And I got it and had to teach myself everything and how to tie flies and all that stuff. But, there were some pretty cool memories. Like I remember the first time I caught a fish in the salt on my fly rod, I was like maybe 13, maybe 14. And I would go fishing with my dad and my uncle and my cousin. And, we would fish with conventional tackle. They were meat fishing. So we would catch a limit of whatever we were after for the day. And then they'd be like, all right, get the fly rod out. And they'd all go sit on the other side of the boat. And I'd just start thrashing. I'd start thrashing the water with the fly rod. But I remember the first fish that I caught. I don't remember what it was, though. I think it might have been a trout. Or like a sand trout. I remember we used to call them.
One of the spotless ones.
Yeah. Which I hadn't seen one of those in forever.
I haven't seen one of those either in a long, long time.
Yeah, but I just remember like a whole school of them goes cruising by, and I just like threw my fly in there and just like got one, and I was like, oh my God, everybody's like cheering for me. And but I'd caught plenty of like perch and bass and stuff on the fly rod. Yeah. But that was the first fish I caught in the salt, and I remember it was like, oh man, this is cool, which. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, you catch them on the fly wherever, but mostly in bayous. But so that was like a big one. And I remember once catching a big bass on the fly with my grandpa. And that was pretty cool because my grandpa was a preacher, and he had a bunch of preacher buddies, and his preacher buddies. Several of them fished, and because they were preachers, like the people that went to their church, if anybody had like property with a pond or something on it, they knew Reverend
Open access.
Yeah, they knew old Reverend Jones really liked to fish, so they're like, Reverend, anytime you want to come fish my pond, come on over, And I remember going with my grandpa and one of his other preacher buddies, and this pond, I guess it never got fished, and it was just full of huge bass. And I was just like, my grandpa and his buddy were fishing with live minnows, and they were just, like, I don't even know what the limit was back then, but they were definitely over it. They had like all these big bass, and finally they were, like, well, son, I know they like the real stuff. See if you can fool one with one of them fake things
one
you
of them
got.
chicken feathers.
Yeah. And sure enough, I caught a huge bass on the fly, and they were just like, "Oh my God!" Like they couldn't believe it actually worked.
Wow.
Because I remember when another thing of my grandfather, when I got that first fly rod, I remember taking it over and showing it to him, and he was kind of whipping it around. He's like, "Oh, this is nice," And he's like, "There's a way if we could figure out a way to lock that reel, this would make a good crappie pole." Which is funny because now I see you can buy a crappie rod at Academy, and it looks like a It looks like a lot like a floppy old fiberglass fly rod.
No, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Who was your favorite person to fish with back then? Was it your grandfather, your parents? If you're enjoying this episode or any others and want to support the project, I would highly encourage you to check out my new book, Laguna. 288 pages with over 300 images and illustrations, containing excerpts by Eric Glass, Chuck Nizer, Tim O'Brien, Bill Gamble, Ben Paschal, Ryan Sparrow, Michaela Elliott, Rick Hartman, Jaco Lucas, John Pilmer, Corey Bauman, Brian Robinson, and myself. Available at select stores, or you can order it directly at buylagunabook.myshopify.com.
It's probably my dad. Initially when I was younger, it was my grandparents because they went a lot when I was a kid. Then I guess maybe they must have got older and they didn't go as much. And so then I fished with my dad a lot. Also fished with my cousin Andre. He lived not too far from me, so we would hike out and fish the bayous together.
Heard.
So yeah. That was. And then as I got older, then I started fishing by myself a lot.
What age? What time frame?
Well, when I got old enough to drive,
okay.
I would go
makes
by myself.
Sense.
Yeah. And then we were fortunate. Like I remember when I was in high school, our neighborhood, this was outside of Houston, had been built on some former rice fields. And so there was still the irrigation canal that they used to flood the rice fields. So that was full of fish. So I could just take off and hike down and fish and catch bass and perch and stuff. So, and that was just out the back door, my parents' house. So I did that a lot when I was, early high school days. Yeah.
Had you had like this moment, like this, like epiphany of, okay, like I can do this, professionally yet? Or was it not until this point yet?
No.
What did you want to do with your life at that point?
Let's see, when I was, high school.
16, 17, 18.
I was going to be a professional motocross racer.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm curious. Dive into a little bit of that, please.
Yeah, man. I was a really good BMX racer. We had like a BMX track that we had built, in our neighborhood, and I was really good at that. I really wanted to get a motorcycle and try that, so I got one. I wasn't as good on the motorcycle as I was on the bike. I was pretty good, and I probably could have gotten a lot better had I stuck with it. But one of the things, this was like, I think 1979. Yeah. I had a 1979 YZ 125. I remember my mom and dad went with me down to Rose Rich Yamaha, which is still in existence, and I want to say it was like maybe like $1,300. I just remember them paying cash $100 bills for the motorcycle, and I was just like, "Oh my God!" But one of my heroes was this guy Bob Hanna, and I remember reading something in the magazine, and he was talking about how he ran for stamina, because like real motocross is like super. Back then, it was like the old school. You raced 45 minutes plus 2 laps, or 45 minutes plus 1 lap twice in a day. So like 90 minutes. It was pretty brutal. So you had to be in really good physical shape to do it. And I started running, and ended up being a runner. And I just like gave up the motocross stuff. I remember when I was like 16 or 17, I was at a race, and I just like the fear of death entered my mind, and I was like, I could get killed doing this. I'd had a couple of pretty serious accidents.
Really?
Never broke anything, but I remember at one point, my dad, there was one spot on the track where this one kid kept passing me, and my dad's like, "Son, are you scared?" And I was like, "I think I am." My dad was like, "Well, the worst thing that could happen is like you crash and maybe like break a bone or something, He says, "But you're a kid, 6 weeks, you'll be back on the bike, Yeah. And he's like, "Now me, I'm old. I'll be crippled for life." And I was like, I think that was when the fear entered my mind. And then after that, I sucked as a motocross racer.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I started running, and I was a runner for years and years.
At the collegiate level?
No, high school.
Oh,
High
okay,
school.
okay.
Yeah. I ran through high school, but through college, but I didn't compete competitively, on a team or anything in college. But yeah, I continued to run. I guess I can still consider myself a runner. I can still run like 3 miles without stopping.
It's more than I can.
That's like I read somewhere they're like, well, you can consider yourself a runner if you can run 3 miles without stopping. And I was like, well, I can still do that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah. Yeah. Something for you to work up to.
And then so throughout all this time you're running, you go to college, and then you're back to being hardcore fishing, or are you kind of distracted? What's going on in your life at this point?
Man, I never stopped fishing.
Good.
That was a crazy thing. Yeah.
Most people have a little break, and like it's always like the chasing girls phase. Like I hear that a lot.
Yeah. I know. I remember I worked at the Austin Angler with this guy Joe Robinson, and that was always his story, because he worked there forever. And he's like, I see these young boys come in with their dads, and they're all into fly fishing. They're 8, 10, 12, 14. Then they discover girls, and I don't see them again till they're 20.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, no, I always fished, man. I was, partying and, going to college and playing in bands and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I was always
musician
fishing.
too.
I was an entertainer.
Interesting.
I was in a band. I sang in a band. We were very popular, very successful. I was able to quit
Originals
my
or covers?
job. All originals.
No shit.
And we got a record deal, all that stuff. But the biggest bonus for me was we made enough money for me to quit my job, so I got to fish a lot more.
Yeah.
So we'd play. If we weren't on tour, we only played on the weekends. We'd play Dallas or Houston or somewhere on like a Saturday night, and be like, okay, guys, I'd show up to the gig with my fishing gear, my camping gear, and I'd be like, well, I won't be coming to practice this week because I'm going to be fishing in New Mexico all week, and I'll see y'all at the gig next Friday. So yeah, I was always focused on the fishing.
What was your favorite venue you ever played as a band?
Our home venue was this place here in Austin called Liberty Lunch, which is like a legendary. We played a bunch of crazy spots in Houston and Dallas, we toured a fair amount, West Coast, East Coast. And that was like late 80s, early 90s. Wow. So there was like all kinds of crazy stuff going on then, I know. We crossed paths with a lot of cool bands, played with a lot of cool bands, it was a wild time. But so it's, the home venues were always good because that was the home crowd. But Houston was always great. There was a few places in Houston. I'm trying to remember. Like we played this one place, Power Tools, which was like kind of a disco / concert venue. And I'm blanking on it now. But there were a few other places. Houston was always legendary because the crowds in Houston were just insane. Like we would go to Houston and people would just.
Did you ever cross paths with like Kerry Marcus? Because Kerry Marcus was like really ripping the guitar at that time.
I didn't until Kerry was our rep at the Austin Angler, but I did not. That's the first I've heard it.
I didn't know that either.
I knew that Kerry played guitar because he and my old boss Larry, because Larry also played guitar. They talked a little bit about playing guitar, but I never.
Apparently he was like phenomenal.
Really?
Like, actually phenomenal. I remember
awesome.
I tried to get him to talk a little or brag a little bit about it when we did our podcast. He wouldn't budge.
Really?
Like, dude, like everything else, really?
Wow, that's funny. Did he tell you about his alter ego, Nick Sabatini?
No. Get into it a little bit.
Now, I don't know a whole lot about that, but, Kerry was Kerry Marcus from the Neiman Marcus family.
Yes.
And he
didn't mention that on the episode either. I found that out after. I didn't know he was heir to the Neiman Marcus.
Yeah, Kerry Marcus. And he worked, I guess, at retail in Dallas, but he was not Kerry Marcus when he was working at the store. He was Nick Sabatini. At least that was the story that I heard, and he didn't deny it.
It sounds like a fake name he'd give girls at the bar.
Yeah. So he could be incognito because he was like, you can't be like working at Neiman Marcus and be like Carrie Marcus, like, oh hey, people would never leave him alone. But yeah, he was a good dude. He was pretty funny, but I had no idea he was a musician.
So you mentioned Austin Angler. How long from like high school days, college days did it take for you to end up at the Austin Angler, and how did you get that spot?
I ended up there as soon as I found out about it when I was, in college at UT. And like later on, Joe was like, oh yeah, you were one of the first customers that hung around all the time. So I guess I got in there pretty early. Like I moved to Austin in 82 and I don't think the Angler was open in 82. It closed in 04. And it was there for 23 or 26 years, something like that. It had a pretty long run. But as soon as I found out there was a fly shop in Austin, I was there. And I was still playing music. So that would have been in the, late 80s, early 90s. And like I said, I was making enough money in the band so that I didn't have a job. So if I wasn't fishing somewhere, I was hanging out at the shop. Yeah. Yeah, I was there all the time.
Did you, by any chance, hear of or get to visit the fly casting clubs? Because at the time, there was a San Antonio casting club and there was an Austin casting club.
I did not. That's just the first I've ever heard of that.
I heard of it like about a year ago, and I was like blown away. I was like,
really?
And I haven't. Everyone I've asked, they've all never heard of it. It's like, imagine it's like a very small thing that maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I was like, oh man.
That's wild. No, that's the first I've heard of it.
And so how long did it take you to start working there?
Sometime in the early to mid 80s. Because let's see. So
you leave college direct and start working there, or you were doing you're a musician right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it happened shortly after I decided to get out of the band. Right after we got a major label record deal.
What made you decide that?
Record. Stupidity, I guess. No, it was a long chain of events. It was back in those days. That was like the goal if you're playing in a band was to get a major label record deal because that was the only way your music was going to get out. Yes. And so we worked really hard for that, and it was pretty stressful. And me and our guitar player, who's kind of a punk rock cult hero. Still to this day, Tim Kerr, he just, it was weird. At the time, I was like, he's just scared of selling out. He doesn't want to, tarnish his image as this punk rock cult hero was kind of how we saw it. But, his thing was like me and him had kind of become the band leaders over the years. And he and I were not getting along. Partly because nobody else in the band felt like he listened to anybody. He only listened to me. So, and I'd say, well, hey, Tim, we're thinking, we should do this. And then everybody would go, no, we didn't say that. So it always ended up being kind of like me and Tim going head to head. And finally, Tim was like, well, I think I'm going to just get out of the band because if I stay in the band, we won't be friends anymore. And I would rather be friends with you than be in a band with you. And I was like, oh, dude. So anyway, but he was the creative force behind the band, and he got out, and we tried to find somebody to replace him. I tried to stick around, but it was obvious like the magic was gone. So I'm like, I'm out. Gotcha. So the band actually did continue on for maybe a couple years after that without the two of us, but it was never quite the same. But so we get this record deal. We're like, I remember we were in like San Francisco. We walk in the Tower Records in San Francisco, and they got like a big display with our CD on it. I mean, we made a couple of vinyl records before that. That's how long ago that was.
You still have one of those?
Maybe
you should post it. You should show it off a little bit.
I posted a video that we made for MTV in 1991.
Yeah, my gosh.
I posted that not too long ago. That was pretty funny because it's 1991. I was rapping and fly fishing.
That's so sick.
Yeah, in a float tube or walking around on waders. Yeah. I mean, I'm like to this day like rapping and fly fishing in 1991. I don't think it's been recreated since then. But yeah. So anyway, I got out of the band and I was working at Whole Earth Provision Company selling climbing gear because I was a climber as well. That was like my other thing besides fishing. And I was just hanging out at the shop all the time. And I remember sitting there talking to Larry, the guy that owned the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, I'm kind of like thinking about moving. You know, I got this buddy in Seattle and I could probably get the job at this outdoor shop up there, you know, because I've been working the whole earth. I climb, I fish, all this stuff. So, you know, pretty sure I could get a job up there. My good buddy, Leo, who I've fished with all over the world in between then and now, was trying to get me to move there because he was miserable because of the weather. He was from El Paso and he's like living in Seattle in the 90s. Yeah. So, and the other thing was I had a band in San Francisco that really wanted me to move there and join the band. And they were like just on the edge of maybe like making this big breakthrough. I think maybe they had a video on MTV, but they didn't have a singer. They had it was like Primus. They had like the bass player also sang. I'm not naming the band because the next thing I'm going to tell you is like, they sent me some of the songs and I was like, oh, these songs are horrible. I can't sing these songs, you know, but it was like, I would have been able to move to San Francisco, wouldn't have had to get a job, would have immediately been in a band and, you know, life would have been good. So I'm like kind of torn. So I'm telling Larry, the guy that owned the Austin Angler, this, what I'm thinking about. And he's just like, dude, why don't you just work here? And I was like, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, you can work here. And if it doesn't work out, you know, like I'll give you a good recommendation, the best recommendation you've ever gotten, and you can, you know, do something else. And I was like, well, dude, I never got a recommendation for anything ever before. So that would be so I was just like, yeah, what the hell? And I started working there and I was there. Oh, it's funny though. Larry's like, I got one condition. Like, if you're going to work here, you got to do one thing. I was like, okay, what? He goes, you got to keep painting your toenails pink. I was like, what? Yeah, because I had on a pair of Tevas and I had pink toenails. You know, he's like, we need a little bit of that in the fly shop.
A little bit of pizzazz.
yeah. So I started working there, and I was there for another 10 or 12 years until it closed in 2004, July of 2004.
Well, how was that? How were some of those days and stuff like that? Were you beginning to guide at that point?
Initially, no, we didn't even think about guiding. I mean, there was a few guides out there, a couple local guides here and there. Chuck was guiding down at the coast.
Yeah.
I think he was the first guide I knew at the coast.
And you met Eric through Austin Angler as well?
Yeah, I met Eric through Austin Angler. Yeah, through my college buddy who had been
who were your roommates?
With
Yes,
Eric.
right.
But yeah, but he was like, yeah, you fly fish. I know this dude named Eric I used to live with in college. He was kind of weird. I think he's a fly fishing guide at the coast. Yeah. So I didn't really think about the guiding thing at all. There were, like I said, there were some people who were guiding and, you know, we kind of definitely helped Chuck out. We fished with Chuck a lot back in the days. But I didn't even really think about it. There was a couple other guys, Johnny and Marcus, who still guides in Central Texas rivers, Marcus Rodriguez, and he had a partner, Johnny. They started doing some trips, canoe trips on the rivers. And me and Joey Lynn, who worked there, and JT Van Zant worked there at the time. We just all started doing some guiding. And it was really, Larry encouraged us. Larry was like, there's so many people in the world of fly fishing that owe so much to Larry and the Austin Angler days. Like a lot of people got started because of Larry. So Larry was really like encouraging us to do that because he saw that as a way that we could make some more money. Like, you know, he's like, I pay you guys as much as I can, but you could do this and make extra money on the side. So we just started guiding just to make a little extra money, you know? And, when the shop shut down in 2004, I had a partner. We were considering buying Larry out. He was going to make us a really good deal, maybe open a shop, keep the shop going, or move to a different location or whatever. We even had like a minute there where we were considering starting or buying this guide shop in Colorado that I'd worked for later on. But we're kind of crunching the numbers, and it was like, well, the only part of this business that consistently makes money is the guide service. And I was like, well,
let's just do that.
Yeah. So I kind of hit the ground running. July of 2004 was when I was officially only a fly fishing guide. But I don't know, we probably started guiding sometime in the, later in the 90s. And we'd probably been at it for a few years by the time the shop closed down, enough to where I had a fairly decent
clientele base.
Yeah. Because that was one of the things I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, we put up a website for the Austin Angler. And I remember at the time I was like, that's a lot of money. That seems like a waste, But the site was up, and I kind of started helping with some of that stuff. And I remember one day telling Larry, I was like, hey, I think I want to be in charge of like the website stuff. And he's like, you don't know anything about that. And I was like,
but I'll learn.
I don't. I was like, I think it might be something worth learning.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I actually put up my personal website, alvindedeaux.com, in 2001. It's still up. This is 2025. So it's been up forever. But I was like, yeah, I think I need to learn how to do this. So because I had helped Larry with the website and the email list, when he shut down, he gave me the email list.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he took down the main Austin Angler website, and he put up like a 1-page site that just said, Austin Angler, thanks for the memories, blah, blah, blah. If you want to go fishing, here's how you get in touch with Alvin.
Oh, okay.
And so that, the email list, just kind of the clientele that had already sort of built up while we were guiding. And I was like, all right, here we go.
Before the shop closed, who were some of like the rock stars of the space, guys that, you would look at with either like praise or even some sort of like envy, like, oh man, I wish I was doing that?
It was weird because I really didn't know that many guides. Like I knew Chuck, and I was like, we fished with Chuck a lot.
Did you meet Skates at any point?
I did. He came to the shop. He might have done a couple of presentations, but I didn't. I was like, that was too far to drive in my 1966 Volvo white sedan. I mean, I could go down and fish with Chuck. It only took me like 3 hours and something. So, Chuck Skates definitely was on the radar. I mean, Larry, our boss, he knew everybody that was definitely in the Texas fly fishing community. So I remember all those names, and I, heard lots of stories. But Chuck and Freddie and those were the local guys that I knew. There was a guy, I can't remember his name. There was a guy that started doing some trips out on the Devil's River. And then we had another buddy who was kind of our age, this guy Kelly Watson, who was doing trips on the Blanco River. He's out in Louisiana now. I don't think he's in the fly fishing community at all. He still fishes though. But yeah, it was, and of course there was like the Lefty craze, and Joe, the guy that worked with us, was a real good buddy with Dave Whitlock. So I mean, we heard some of those names, and then JT and I went like on this month-long steelhead trip, and so then we started reading about some of those steelhead guys. Trey Combs put out this steelhead encyclopedia, and we'd watch Jim Teeney VHS tapes, wow. Yeah. But it was weird because it was like we didn't have a lot of contact because we didn't have email, we didn't have the internet. We just had a few books and a few old VHS tapes here. I mean, of course, we knew who Lefty Cray was and Bob Clouser and all those guys, but we really didn't know much about what they did. If it wasn't in a book, if they didn't write a book or make a VHS tape, we didn't really have much access.
Did you ever run into this is 2005 is when Bill Gamble and his father put out the 5 Essentials of Fly Casting?
Nope.
Just wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually curious. Run me through those first couple of days as a guide in terms of, okay, like I'm fully involved in this. Like there's no going back. Like, what was the mindset? How was it? How was the fishing, et cetera, et cetera?
Fortunately at that time I had like no responsibilities, just like super low overhead. I really did not need much at all to survive. I mean, like I was in Austin as a young person during the whole slacker era, when that movie got made, like I was ground zero of the slacker movement. So I really did not need a lot. So I could do a couple of trips.
What is the slacker movement?
Well, if you look up the movie Slacker, which was filmed in Austin, a lot of the places that I worked and hung out at were in this movie. And it was basically this whole kind of like just doing enough to get by.
It's a minimalist movement.
Yeah. The epitome of the slacker is you got a part-time job, you work a few days a week, minimal amount so that you can pay to live. And then you pursue whatever is your passion, whether you're an artist, a writer, a musician. But I think the slacker was sort of a negative connotation of like, well, barely work and occasionally make some art, But I was definitely a proponent of that movement. I was lucky. I was in a band for years, so I didn't really have to work. I mean, being in a band, I didn't consider that work. It did pay the bills. So when I started guiding, I really didn't have a lot of, I didn't have to do a ton of trips initially. And the first year was definitely slow, but then the next year I was like, oh, I don't have to stay in Texas year round. I can go to Colorado during the summer when it's hot. So I just loaded everything in my old Volvo and drove to Colorado, guided all summer, and I was like, came home, had some cash, and then, just slowly but surely. And I think a lot of it had to do with how I was fortunate, lucky, maybe smart enough to embrace the whole internet thing.
So that's how you built your clientele out of Texas?
Yeah. When I sent out emails to that email list. I actually started buying like Google AdWords. I did for the longest time, I did like a daily fishing report on my website, which is crazy. And unfortunately I switched host a few years back, and I may have saved all the data initially, but I had like a daily fishing report that just went on forever. So at one point in time, and maybe still now, but if you typed in anything related to fly fishing in Texas, my website was going to pop up first. And then on top of that was going to be an ad that I had bought, so I mean, and I don't know if I was, like I said, I don't know if I was smart or if I just got lucky or what, but that was one of the things that really helped, put myself out there, and of course we're still relying on those, internet things nowadays to make the business happen. But yeah. 01, my first website. And
was it hard going out of Texas and just trying to learn the fishery? Almost like this nomadic style of fishing?
That's funny because it wasn't. I mean, and like there's a lot of people that do that, and all over the world. And it's funny, like if you trout fish and you know how to catch trout or you know how to be a guide, I think being a guide is a totally different skill set from learning a fishery or knowing a fishery. So that's like a different thing. Like that's a different.
Kind of want to pick that apart. What is like some of the characteristics of being a guide versus learning a fishery?
Dealing with people.
Oh, like people skills. Okay.
Yeah, people skills. Just people skills. But then also, I think you have to have a certain type of creativity, which like I said, I was a musician. There's a lot of musicians that are good anglers and good guides, but I think there's a lot of creativity that comes along with that because. You got to be open. You got to be aware. You have to be able to make something out of nothing, So there really is a lot of creativity in it. And I think that if you have those skills, the people skills, the creativity, also just some grit, because it can be hard.
Embrace the suck. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Be willing to, be willing to get kicked in the balls 6 times and get up and then make it all happen on that 7th time. I think if you've got those skills, you could probably go anywhere within reason and figure out how to get it done. So, you see guides who fish in Alaska and then fish in the Keys, or, you know, somebody who salmon fishes in Russia and then goes and guides in the Seychelles, you know, so seemingly totally different.
Polar opposites.
Yeah. And people do that successfully. So yeah, I think it's more of you know, and I hate to say it's like something you're born with, you know, I don't think that's true either, but I think it's more of a mindset and just a willingness to learn and be open to what's out there and figuring out how to make something happen just by being aware, looking around, you know, figuring it out.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and the people skills, you know, that may be the most important because, you know, dealing with people is not always an easy thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah. And I, you know, it's people find this hard to believe, but I would probably consider myself an introvert, especially since the COVID days. I've definitely been like, because I ain't got no problem with staying away from everybody for weeks and months at a time. But you can't be an introvert and be a good fishing guide. I mean, you have to be able to interact with people. And I remember one of the guys I worked for, Jim Adams, who was one of the owners of the Austin Angler. There were multiple owners over the years, and Jim, he's still out there, Adams and Sons. He made like wooden fixtures. He's up in Missoula. He worked with Sims, you know, from back in the old days. And he's retired now, I believe. But Jim moved from Austin to Bozeman, I guess, in the 90s. He was married to Mina Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter, cousin to Mariel and Margot. And he was guiding in Bozeman when he first moved up there. He was building wooden drift boats and guiding. And I remember going up there to visit Jim. Larry and I were fishing with him, and Jim I guess we had started guiding, and Jim's like, well, Alvin, I'm going to give you a little advice about being a fishing guide. And he's like, what I've realized is when you meet your clients in the morning, you know, from that first handshake, you got about 15 minutes to give both of your clients a complete psychological evaluation. You got to figure out what their wants, desires, wishes are. And then you spend the rest of the day trying to make that happen. Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, damn. He's like, yep. He goes, if you can do that, you'll be a good guy.
Pull a rabbit out of a hat, you're a good guy.
Yeah. So that, I think, and that stuck with me because it's true though. I mean, you know, people can have because you can only control so much, you know, that guide, not God sticker, you know, you can only control so much, but you know, you can have one and, you know, you can't please everybody. I'm very comfortable with not being able to please somebody too. I think that's also part of it, you know? But I think, you know, you can have the exact same clients and the exact same fishing experience. And depending on who the guide is, it could be a positive experience or a negative experience, you know? So, I mean, I've heard people say like, we went out with so-and-so and man, it was tough, man. The fishing sucked and, you know, this and that and whatever, and, you know, but man, we had a good time, you know, so-and-so. He's just like, we learned so much from him and he was so kind and he was, you know, he really helped us out and we'll definitely go with him again. And hopefully next time conditions will be better, you know. And then I've also heard people say like, man, we went out with so-and-so and dude, we killed him. Man, because damn, that dude was a jackass. I ain't ever fished with him again. You know? So, yeah. And I mean, you know, I guess you can be a nice guy or a jackass and probably still make a living at it. But, yeah.
Who were, or maybe someone who was one of the most creative people that you met in terms of, like, you know how we just talked about making something out of nothing. Is there someone that comes to mind where every time they went out fishing, you're like, he kind of makes me want to, you know, put in the extra effort, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky because some of the dudes like I hate to be a name dropper, but when a couple of the guys I fished with a lot, especially when I started really fishing saltwater, were JT Van Zandt and Dave Mangum. And I remember the first time going out with Dave on the Austin Angler flat skiff was just a John boat, a John boat with like a 50-horse Suzuki tiller and a carpet platform up front.
Yeah.
I don't even know what we were using for a push pole. It wasn't made out of wood, but it was probably a fiberglass ham radio antenna or something. But I remember going out there with Dave and I was kind of like, all right, dude, so here's what we're looking for, we're looking for this or that, the redfish. He goes, there's one. And I was like, yep, that's one. There's another one over there. I was like, yeah, there's another one.
All right, let me do my job.
So I was like, yeah, this dude's pretty good, So I just remember, fishing with him when he was kind of coming up and other people who were really good anglers. I remember a buddy of ours was pissed off after fishing a day with Dave because they were like, well, fucking Dave guy, man, he fucking catches all the fish. And I was like, yeah, the dude's good. And so I'm not in the least surprised that his career has put him where he is now, because it was super obvious, like from day one that guy had it. Like he had some, it's as just the fishing part as an angler. And a lot of the skills of being a good angler will translate to being a good guide. Not all of them. And just because you're a great angler doesn't mean you're going to be a good guide. But I think a lot of those skills do translate. And I just remember seeing that. I was like, this dude's got it, I will say, though, it's like I had it, this just popped into my head. But my wife, who's no longer with us, she's been gone a year as of yesterday or day before. She was, I'm going to say, the best like instincts of anybody I was ever on a boat with. Cause she was like the same way. Like I remember that first day with Dave and I remember watching my wife and just like, whoa, like she could see better. Yeah. I ain't going to lie. She could see fish better than I could. Like she would see them or if we were sight casting, but even if we weren't sight casting, if we were just, like bass fishing, like fishing down a shoreline, she'd be like, that's the spot, and she'd go over there and catch the fish of the day. It's weird because, and I remember when we first started fishing together, like I'm this famous, expert fishing guide, and we'd go out together and I'd say, well, we're going to do this or that. And she'd be like, well, why? And I was like, because I said so. That's why, and she'd be like, I don't know about that, And initially I'd be like, well, I know what I'm talking about and you don't. But then after a while, I just kind of had to shut up because I was like, nah.
Well, she's right.
Yeah, even if I'm sure that that's not going to work out, which I've learned that as a guide, your clients say, what about this or what about that, and I'd be thinking to myself, that's the last thing I would ever try, but I'm not going to tell this person not to, because as soon as I say that's not going to work,
it'll work.
It'll work. They'll catch the fish of the day, the fish of their life, and I'm just a fucking idiot. But yeah, I had a lot of those moments with my wife, man. She was just like, she was a predator. And
you gonna run me through some of those?
Well, it's like
or just like favorite memories fishing together.
There's two, because I've been asked this question a few times in the last couple of years. But the first one was we were in Colorado. Like she used to live in Colorado. Like we crossed paths a bunch of times before we ever started dating or anything. And one of the times we crossed paths, she was living in Colorado. But we started dating years later, and we go back to Colorado to visit. She had grown up fishing, but not fly fishing. But she picked it up like super fast. She was one of those people, like if she was going to do something, she didn't do it well. Yeah, she didn't necessarily have to be the best, but she had to be better than most. Gotcha. And she was like that on everything. But so we're fishing, and we're fishing this little small stream that I fished with my buddies up there on our guide days off. And it was small enough to where you had to like take turns fishing. So one person would hold the beer cooler, one person would fish, and then you get to the next pool and swap out. And we did that. And at the end of the day, we caught a bunch of fish, and I don't know if she trout fished much before that or not, but she caught a bunch of fish. And we get back to the truck at the end of the day, and she's like, "Oh, that was romantic." And I was like, "Yes,
goddamn right."
Yeah, that, and then like the other just like epic memory was years later. Her birthday is October 18th, which is prime redfish time.
Yeah.
And so we would usually fish on her birthday unless the weather was just total crap. And so we were, I'm staying down there in my trailer, and she drove down, and she's like, "Well, I got to get back to Austin like by, early afternoon so the kids, we can have birthday," because she's got 3 daughters and they're all here. So she's down there with me fishing. So she's like, "I got to get out of here like, pretty early." So I was like, "Okay, well, maybe we'll get lucky." And we get out there, and I mean, I stopped the boat, and it's not like she gets up on the deck. It's not like 2 minutes. She's like, "Oh, there's one." Bam.
Bam.
First cast, nails it. And it just like went on like that until, well into double digits. And she's like, "All right, I got to go." So we roll back. She gets back to Austin by like 2:00, 3-hour drive. And she's like, had birthday cake and all that, but and fortunately I got a lot of that on video. But I was just like, "Oh my God!" Like, who is this person? Like I've never had a day like that. I got to watch it though, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, that was pretty special. So
when did you start heading over to the coast?
I started fishing down there, like I said, in like the 90s. Fishing down there a lot. And
like guiding is what I'm sorry, that's a message.
Okay.
Yeah, my bad.
Well, guiding maybe a decade ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's a funny thing. Like I fished down there with Chuck, fished down south with Eric,
which I do want to get into. So I'm reminding myself right now. Yes.
Yeah, fish with Freddie around Corpus, and for the longest time, just never even really thought about guiding down there. As a matter of fact, I went and fished with Tom Horby in POC years ago. And Tom's like, "Dude, when you gonna trade that riverboat in for a flat skiff and come on down here?" And I was like, that's a good idea. I will say that I will give credit to Mr. Van Zant, JT, because he and I both were kind of at the same time. We're like we should guide down there. He had like gone off on this whole other life path, and then came back to guiding and was guiding, here in Central Texas. And then, he'd been fishing down at the coast for a million years as well, and was just kind of like, "Yeah, we should guide at the coast." And I was like, "Yeah, we should," So then that was kind of the start. But yeah, but it was like the guiding in general. Like I knew people that guided, but I never really thought like, "Oh, that's something I should do." It's so weird. I don't know why. And now when I talk to people, younger guys who are guiding and maybe thinking about, making a move and doing something else, or people who are thinking about getting into it, period, my first thing is, it's like, well, don't wait. Like if you think it's something you want to do, you should definitely just do it now and try. Either you will realize like, yes, this is something I want to do, and you will be that much further ahead of the game, or you'll find out in time like, "No, this ain't what I want to do."
And then you'll be further ahead of the game. And then you're moving the right way.
And then go find out what the next thing is, But yeah, that was if I could go back in time, although like, I wasn't like I was not having a good time and just kind of doing what I wanted to do. But I was like, yeah, maybe if I'd have figured it out a little sooner would have been better. But I can't change the past, and the past was pretty good.
Run me through some of those Eric Glass stories.
So,
or how did you again? You mentioned to me off air how you met him a little bit. Would like to know how that happened, how you guys got together, started fishing, whatever.
So, Eric and I met because of Jeff Coleman. Yes. Still friends on Facebook. He lives down in Victoria, but we grew up in Houston together, ran track and cross country, and were in the whole Austin punk rock scene. And when I started working at the Austin Angler, the Jeff guy was like, "Hey man, I got this buddy named Eric. I think he's a fishing guide, like down on the Texas coast somewhere. He was my roommate in college. He was real weird, but I think he's a pretty good fisherman, and I don't know if I've reached out to Eric or Eric reached out to us, via the Austin Angler. And we were, I think we were, because this was like in the 90s, we were sending a lot of people saltwater fly fishing, which was kind of definitely back then pretty cutting edge.
Oh, absolutely.
So we were sending people to Eric and sending people to Chuck Nizer, mostly Chuck and Eric. There were a couple other guys here and there. And so it was kind of like, at one point, like, I know Chuck had an Austin Angler sticker on his boat, like we were like his sponsors, and so we were sending him quite a bit of business. And I guess we were sending Eric quite a bit of business because, I didn't even think about it at the time, but it was like, I'd call Eric up and be like, oh, so man, I think I can get down there on this date or whatever, and would go down there and Eric would just take us fishing for free, which, I couldn't afford a guide back then anyway, but now I'm just like, I almost feel bad because I was like, wow, Eric and those guys took us fishing a lot of times and we never paid anything, but we did send them clients. We did send them clients and we sent them flies and leaders and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, man, I went down and fished with Eric. There's a couple of memorable Eric trips. Like we went and fished, wade fished somewhere for snook. And I remember me and it was Scott, Mr.
Sparrow?
No. Scott from Wyoming, Mr. Double Bunny, Scott Sanchez.
Okay.
Scott and Eric and I went somewhere and like Eric had like the keys to some locks and
this is back in the day when he had the pass to the ship channel.
Yes.
He mentioned that. I mentioned being able to do that stuff. That is crazy.
Yeah. So me and Scott and Eric went and were like wade fishing, like walking, like it was crazy. I think we caught like more than 30, maybe 40 snook. It's just like it's one afternoon wade fishing, and there were some big ones too.
Yeah, there were big ones in there.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So that was one, and then another time I went down there. Speaking of musicians, my buddy Ian Moore, an old school Austin musician. Although I guess he's been in Washington forever. Me and Ian, I think Ian was playing some gig maybe in South Padre or something, and me and Ian go with Eric. And we're catching, we had a pretty good day catching some redfish. I think we fished a couple, 3 days. But then one day, Eric's like, y'all want to go offshore? And
we took y'all offshore like 10 miles in the little skiff?
15.
He used to tell me it was ballsy, one motor.
Yeah. And I remember at one point, I was like thinking to myself, well, because Eric had his captain's license. He had like in a plaque on the wall at his house. And I remember thinking to myself, I sure am glad that I saw Eric's captain's license because I know he's competent to be out here because I really don't feel like this is a good place to be right now. Yeah. And I remember Eric saying like, oh man, don't worry about it. This boat ain't nothing but a piece of foam wrapped in fiberglass. It'll sink. I mean, it won't sink, know? And, but the crazy thing was like, we were out and fishing was pretty good, but and I think I had done that once before with Eric. The only 2 times I've ever gotten seasick. I've never thrown up, but I definitely got seasick. Twice in my life was with Eric Glass in that skiff. I know we were 15 miles out one day, but maybe 10 or so the previous time. But I remember fishing was pretty good, and Ian and I both were like, we were like swapping out real fast, like, ah, man, you want to get up? I was like, well, you only been up there like
5 minutes.
Yeah, like, no, I'm cool. I'll let you fish for a while.
It's a little green over there.
Yeah. We were just bobbing around, but neither one of us puked. And we get back and, of course, Eric, he's just like sitting there laughing, like eating a sandwich or whatever. No big deal. And we both get back and Ian's like, yeah, dude, I was just waiting for you to puke. Then I was going to puke. I was like, I was waiting for you to puke. Then I was going to puke. But nobody puked. But being seasick is pretty bad.
Oh, yeah. I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a couple of my most memorable Eric Glass stories. And then in the time Eric called me too, there's another one. I wasn't there, but Eric called the Austin Angler. He's like, "Hey man, I got to tell you." I was like, "What's up?" He goes, I hooked the one I've been trying to hook forever. I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, dude, it was a big tarpon.
Yeah.
It was like it was like a jumping refrigerator."
That's definitely one of his mannerisms.
Yeah, I was like, "A jumping refrigerator, huh?" He's like, "It hit the water like a refrigerator." Yeah. And he was like, I was out there and I was like, it was like an off day or something. He had like one of his buddies or client or somebody in the boat with him. And he said the fish just started going out to sea. And he said it was so far out that this other boat like crossed between us and where the fish were. And of course, it was so far away that they didn't know they were doing anything wrong. And he's like, the other boat like cut his line or something. Yeah, and he's like, he lost it. And he's like, it's the one I've been looking for a long time. Who knows? Might have been like a 200-pound fish.
Yeah, I know. There's some big ones.
Yeah.
I flicked one really big one out on the surface also. And there definitely be monsters on that coast side. You personally, have you had a chance to hook some of the Texas coast side tarpon?
I have not.
Really?
I have not. I haven't. I have not made very many attempts. Now, I did go. I'm trying to think. Have I? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no. If I did, it was a small guy, not a big one. I've gone a couple of times and attempted with Eric. Conditions were not good, and I was out another time with Tom Horby, and probably could have had a pretty good chance. Like we saw a woman on a boat with Kevin Townsend hook a big one and put it up in the air, and it popped off, after a couple jumps. And we were seeing quite a few fish that day, but I was fishing with this old client of mine, and he had paid Tom for 3 days of fishing, and I just got invited, and Tom was like really excited about getting me on a tarpon, but my client buddy
never made it happen. So you never switched.
He just couldn't throw the 12 weight. So we were blind casting with the 12 weight base, throwing it, rolling fish or whatever. And I just felt guilty because it's like, homeboy's paying for 3 days of fishing just to watch
you're
me
the one
fish.
Who hooks it, yeah.
So I was like, hey, let's go catch some redfish. That was the one time where I was like, dang, I could tell Tom was like, oh, get this other dude off the boat.
It's the worst feeling too.
Yeah, I didn't care. I mean, I was like,
being on Tom's spot where you're the guy sitting on the cooler can cast much better. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's tough, man.
Yeah. You earlier mentioned to me that you were able to visit and fish around the world quite a bit. What are some of those areas, locations that you kind of are fond of, or that are proud that you got to go visit?
Well, the most exotic thing, of course, was fishing in the Seychelles for those GTs. I mean, that was crazy. That was definitely one of those once in a lifetime trips, but probably going to be once in a lifetime because the travel to get there is just so brutal, man. Yeah. And, and I have, it's just like living here. I've never gone somewhere and thought like, I got to do whatever I can to get back there. Like I enjoy everywhere, but I'm really, I've kind of turned into a homebody. Like I'm good fishing in Texas. I can fish in Texas for the rest of my life. But yeah, the Seychelles thing was really over the top. And a lot of it was because of just the whole buildup. Like I heard about it a long time before I was able to go. I watched that Yeti Cosmo movie like everybody else did. I remember sitting
Gangsters of the Flats by Yako. That got me going too.
I remember sitting on the back deck in Colorado with my buddies after guiding, and that Yeti thing came out. We watched that, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's insane!" And then fast forward, because it was all about. Oh crap! Now I must be getting old. I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who was basically the star of that film. It'll come to me. But anyway, young black guy who had worked his way up from working in the lodge to now he's, a guide, and it was like maybe his first year as a guide. And when I finally got to go there, that was who I got to fish with the first day I was there. I was like, oh man, no way. And at that point, he's like one of the top guides out of the whole place, so that was pretty cool. But, fishing, I remember like one of my first like really exotic fishing trips was I spent a couple of months in Argentina and Chile.
Really?
Just fishing. Yeah, this was like in 2001.
Damn.
And my buddy Leo, who I've fished everywhere with,
like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, he was working at Microsoft, and he started working there in the 90s, right out of college. And homeboy was banking, and he was like this young single guy, and he's like, dude, let's take a couple months off and go fishing and climbing. And we just bummed all around, like all over southern Argentina, Chile. We've drank wine and partied and climbed mountains and fished, and that was definitely one of those, like, I'll never forget that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was that was a good time.
Mostly targeting golden dorado?
No, we were south, so we were trout fishing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
wow.
we were down. Well, it was cold. I mean, we're like climbing glaciers and stuff.
Oof.
Yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, it was oof. There was a few times where oof. The week that we spent in our tents, just looking out, going, "Oh, I'm not going out there." Yeah. It was something though. But I mean, it's like, just like if I'd have done that trip and I'd never done anything else ever again in my life, I would have memories. Yeah,
well, it sounds like almost like a pilgrimage type deal. So I can get that.
Yeah. So that was I don't know. But like I said, I mean, pretty happy.
Yeah.
Just around here.
When did AlvinDedeaux.com become All Water Guides?
It never did.
Well, I'm saying, I know it didn't, but like,
All Water Guides was, I think I launched that in 2011, and
what spurred that?
Well, it's funny, and once again, I was lucky, I want to say, and maybe a little bit smart.
It's like you're not giving yourself enough credit.
I was just, paying attention to the vibes in the universe. But I had gotten to the point by 2011, 2010, 2011, I had gotten to the point to where I was doing physically as many trips as I could. And which was good. I mean, I guess that's the goal. If you're a fishing guide, it's just to do as many trips as you can. But because I was, had been doing like daily fishing reports, I was getting a lot of traffic, a lot of inquiries, a lot more trips than I could physically do. And for a few years, I had been just, farming trips out to my buddies who were also guides who maybe weren't quite as internet savvy. And at one point, it got to where like I would get a call or an email and somebody say, hey, like, I need 5 guides for this trip, blah, blah, blah. And we got that. No problem. Get everything all set up. And then the next email or phone call was like, hey man, I'm spending a lot of money with you. You think I could get a discount on this? People don't really do that as much anymore, I don't think. But, it happened enough times where I was like, no, man, because, I was doing all the legwork and I was getting paid just the same as everybody else, but everybody else is like chilling and just waiting for me to set it up. And so I was just kind of thought like, this is a potential business opportunity. I could, charge these guys a small commission and then all they have to do is show up and I'll do like the internet and all the promotion and jump through all the hoops and take the money and get the clients all happy. And so that was the start of All Water Guides. And, it was like, as most ventures, it wasn't just me. I mean, I had people helping me out, people, kind of steering me the right direction. But that was definitely, and I do remember at the time thinking like, well, Alvin Dedeaux fly fishing, that's pretty cool, but I don't think anybody's going to buy that, And I was like, but All Water Guides, that sounds pretty cool. I might be able to turn that into something I could sell at some point in time. So that was also part of the motivation. So 2011 was the official launch. That was when the website went up, and so that's been good. I definitely focus a lot more of my time and energy on All Water Guides and not so much on myself personally. Although, I still do all my YouTube stuff and my, I think that is kind of a legacy of, a million years of building that up. So that's kind of runs on its own, but the All Water Guides is probably my day job now.
Yeah.
Although it should be definitely my day job. I mean, I should probably have quit just guiding a while ago and focused on just the business, but I like guiding, so I don't really want to quit.
Is there anyone that you kind of took under your wing, almost like a mentorship deal? Because it sounds like you didn't have anyone who kind of helped you in terms of the guiding. You kind of figured it out on your own, correct?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I didn't.
Or were there folks who kind of like helped you and gave you pointers?
I watched a lot of people.
Gotcha.
I worked in Colorado summers. That was probably where I learned the most. I worked like 10 seasons in Colorado as a guide, and up there, that's a thing. Like guide services are a real thing. Like I worked for, in the Vail Valley, there are probably 3 or 4 shops that have 20 plus guides at every shop. When we're talking like you could drive 20 minutes and hit like 3 or 4 shops that have 20 guides each. So I'm just kind of working in that environment. I learned a lot of stuff that way, and in the 10 years I worked at 2 different physical locations for like 5 different owners. So I got to see a lot of like, what's that saying? How they make the sausage?
Like behind the scenes stuff. So I get it.
Yeah. So I definitely had a lot of people to watch, and then, but there wasn't really anybody doing it here on that scale. Not really. It's a totally different landscape. It's easier here, I think. It's definitely easier here. It's Texas. We don't have nearly as many regulations and all that stuff, but also I think our rivers are a lot tamer, and, we're not running the kind of volume, like I would work at a shop with 30 other guides, and during the summer, the vast majority of those guys were on the water every day. We don't have that kind of traffic. Yeah. So it's a lot easier. It's easier in a lot of ways. But like Bonner Armbruster, Cassio Silva, those guys, I think they've been with me the longest. And, like, I'll give myself some credit. I know those guys would say that they've learned a lot from me, but I look at those guys and go, damn, I don't know if I was ever that good. Really. But I think also part of that comes with not having a framework. So when there's not a clear-cut model of how to do something, you got to make a lot of mistakes to get there, and I think just kind of paving a little bit of the road makes you be able to accelerate a lot faster. That's a good analogy.
I like it.
If you got a paved road versus a dirt road, you can get to
max 40 versus max 90.
Yeah. So I think that's something I can be proud of, because those some of the guys that work for us, I'm like, damn, I wish I was that good. But I mean, not that I'm bad, but I definitely feel fortunate to have those guys. And the other thing too is, like in Texas, there's not any, like in Colorado, you have to work for an outfitter, because of the permits and all that stuff, and unless you can't get a permit, they're all gone, and they're super expensive. Whereas here, you don't have, those guys don't have to work for me. They don't have to give me a commission. They can do their own thing, So I really have to provide some value to, for what I'm doing in order to say, hey, man, do you mind me taking a percentage of the trip, And I try to keep the percentage as low as I can. Definitely much lower than what you would get working for an outfitter in Colorado, but I don't have the kind of overhead they do either. Yeah. But I feel like that's my job is to provide some value, make them, feel good about working for me, because they certainly don't have to. So it's fun.
Yeah.
Keeps me on my toes.
Well, speaking of keeping on your toes, as someone who's been able to build their name, their brand, their legacy, if you will, through the infancy and the comeuppance of social media and internet and all this electronic side of the industry that we never really saw, what do you personally think about the modern state of the industry when it comes to social media and whatnot?
I don't know. I think it's just like the rest of the state of society. It's in flux. I'd be curious if I could fast forward, even 10 years, but definitely like 20 years from now, what are things going to look like? And I have no clue. Nobody has a clue. And I feel like maybe it's accelerating even faster. At least that's what they tell us.
Definitely feels like it.
Things are accelerating faster. So I think it's just like the rest of life. And I think back in the old days, we were much more innocent,
Yeah.
We're definitely more isolated. So things happen a lot faster. Information spreads a lot quicker, which is both good and bad. But if I was around when they first started, the printing press first came out and they were writing books and anybody could write a book and anybody could get a book, I'm sure that felt pretty traumatic to a lot of people at the time, so I see this as kind of the same thing. I mean, this is just part of modern society and life progressing. And, I guess you could look at anything, social media, books, television, and see both positive and negative. And, modern society has definitely got some real positives, some real negatives.
Mm-hmm.
I really can't change any of that.
Yeah, you're not supposed to.
I gotta figure out a way to be happy, successful, feel good at the end of the day, regardless of what's going on around me. I can only control what I do, how I think, how I treat other people. So that's kind of where I try to focus. But at the same time, man, I ain't planning on getting left behind. I'm trying
Which is exactly what I was getting at.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay on top of the social media.
Yeah.
I mean, AI. I'm a AI user, man. I have paid accounts for several of the AI companies, and I'm like, I gotta stay with it. But it's like anything else. I mean, you're a photographer. Film is cool. But if you're trying to make a living being a photographer,
you're not shooting film anymore.
You're going to be staying on top of whatever's the latest technology, whatever you're doing. I think people are driven, to whatever's, the cutting edge, because that's the most exciting thing. There's always the whole nostalgia thing. I mean, fly fishing itself is sort of a nostalgia thing, like this. It's definitely not the most effective way to catch a fish, but maybe it's the most fun way. It's the way that we choose to do it. But at the same time, we're out there in carbon fiber boats and we're using digital mirrorless cameras to capture our day on the water. And, it's just this whole part of our life is just everything is progressing, So I guess at the end of the day, really to me, whether it's social media or what, it's kind of more about just trying to be respectful to other people and recognizing that, we don't have any control over any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And we can choose to use these things or not use these things. But at the same time, unless you're explicitly trying to do harm with whatever it is, you just got to let people do their thing, man.
Yeah.
So I embrace all the stuff, all the technology. I embrace it because I can't remember who said that, but the only thing that's constant is change.
Yeah. As someone who is adamantly pro Texas, like we just mentioned, you said, if I fish Texas for the rest of my life, I'll still be happy. In your opinion, what is like the most Texas fish found in Texas? Well,
redfish would be one, and then the other would be a bass, probably a Guadalupe bass, because that's the Texas fish, right?
Yeah.
It's a state fish of Texas. You can't find them anywhere else. So that may be the most Texas fish of them all, but I'm definitely going to say redfish. I mean, there's redfish a lot of places, but I feel like the Texas redfish, just the environment and what we have here, the Barrier Island system is something that, yes, they have that other places as well, but it's pretty unique here in Texas. So those would be my two fish. And like I said, if I could only fish for two fish, I'd be happy fishing for bass and redfish till I die.
Well,
in Texas.
Tell me your favorite Guadalupe bass story, and then tell me your favorite redfish story if you haven't already.
The redfish story is
the one with your wife. I believe.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, I've had some great days on the water, but that's the one that I'll just always remember.
For sure.
The Guadalupe bass, that's a tough one because I've caught so many of them.
It's gonna be just you as an angler. Maybe it was like a client. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, this one wasn't me personally, but one of our guides years ago. The Colorado River, which is where pretty much the only place I fish now or guide now on a river. For the longest time, we'd been catching these really large Guadalupe bass, bigger than anything else in any other waterway around here. And for years, the biologists were like, "Oh no, those are Guadalupe hybrids. They're mixed with something else because Guadalupe bass typically don't get that big."
What size range are we talking here?
2+ pounds.
Yeah, okay.
Pushing
So like
3 pounds.
Quality, yeah. Okay.
Because you go most places, you catch a pound Guadalupe bass. That's a pretty good one, But we were catching a lot of 2+ pounders. And one of our guides, Shay McClanahan, he was at Texas Parks and Wildlife talking to this biologist. He was there selling them some chairs because that's his gig. He's like sells office furniture, but they, of course, anytime there's two fishermen in one place, they find each other and they start talking about fishing, So he's in there talking about fishing with this biologist, and he's showing him these pictures of these big old Guadalupe hybrids that we're catching on the Colorado. And I don't know who the biologist was, but the biologist says, "Hey man, we've been doing a little kind of covert DNA testing, and we feel like that those Guadalupe bass hybrids that y'all are catching in the Colorado River may actually be pure Guadalupe bass. So next time one of your clients catch something that's like, in the 3 pound range, you should probably keep it." And so he's like, "Okay." And so sure enough, that winter is February. Shay's out with this regular client of his. They catch this huge Guadalupe bass and they weigh it. They got like 2 different scales. And he's like, "I think this is like the new world record Guadalupe bass." And the client's like, "I don't care. Put it back." Yeah. Brian Townsend. Brian's like, "Nah, man, put it back. I don't care." But Shay's like, "Nah, man, we got to keep it." He's like, "I ain't killing that fish." So they immediately get on the phone. They call Marcus DeJesus, the Parks and Wildlife biologist. They're like, "We got a large Guadalupe bass." He's like, "I'll meet you at the takeout." So they keep the fish. I'm not sure how they made a stringer. He didn't have a stringer. He had never kept a bass before. But anyway, they figure out some way to keep this fish happy and healthy till they get to the takeout. Marcus is there with a giant cooler with an aerator and everything in it. He's like, they weigh it a couple more times, take a couple more pictures, put it in the aerator, take it to Cabela's because they have a certified scale there. They weigh it. Sure enough, this is like the new world record Guadalupe bass caught on a fly. And they put it in the tank at Cabela's, and it lived there for a while. Brian ended up getting like multiple records, water body record, IGFA record. He actually got a replica of the fish and got to go to the Shara Lunker thing at the end of the year, where all the other like 13+ pound bass guys are there. And he's there with this little 3.5 pound Guadalupe
I'd be doing
bass.
the same thing.
Yeah. And the fish was at Cabela's, and this guy, Brian, the guy that caught it, went up there at one point, and he was like, he just felt like that the people at Cabela's weren't sufficiently excited about having that fish in their tank there. So he's like, "Oh, I'm taking it back to the river." He didn't.
That'd be so funny if he did that.
Parks and Wildlife found out about it, and they took the fish to the fishery center, and that fish was hand fed until the day it died, so it lived out his life, had a great life. But that's probably my favorite Guadalupe bass story. It didn't have anything to do with me other than, I just was.
No, it's a great story though.
Facilitated a little bit of it. It was an all water guides trip. It was funny too, because, we're an Orvis endorsed guide service, and the guy who caught the fish just happened to be using an Orvis rod, wearing an Orvis rain jacket with an Orvis hat on. So it was like,
put him on the pro program.
Yeah. We got a little bit of mileage out of that Guadalupe bass. So yeah, that's my favorite quad story.
Yeah.
Or the most memorable one.
Have you had a chance to do any of the holdover trout or the stripers here in Texas?
I used to guide on the Guadalupe. I haven't done it in more than a decade now, I think. I never caught a striper on in the Guadalupe. Caught some below Buchanan in the river. Now I do have a story about that though. Another one of our guides, John Erskine, who is still on our website. He does a few trips a year. I think enough just to so he can write off his fishing gear. He, I think, still currently holds, I have to look, the Texas state fly rod record for a striper that he caught in the Guadalupe years ago. He went out one day and he was trout fishing, and the striper was in this one pool, chased his trout, kind of like up to his feet several times. And so he went back, I don't know, the next day or day after, and he took his trout rod, and then he took like a 8-weight or something with a big streamer on it. He's like, I'm going to catch that striper. And sure enough, he caught the striper. It was him and that guy, Shay, who was on the record Guadalupe bass trip. They call me screaming, and I'm like, what's going on? And then a couple seconds later, ping, I get this picture, and it's John standing on the side of the river holding this giant striper,
I think I've seen that picture before.
Yeah, probably. It was I can't remember what the previous record was, 20 something pounds. I think this fish was 37 pounds. It was massive. Man. It was, and I think they were calling me oh, we need to, call the game warden. We need a scale. We need a but sure enough, it certified. It was the new Texas state record, and it got out there, and of course everybody's like, oh my God. And so everybody's down there trying to catch another record on the Guadalupe after that. The funny thing was, that was the first striper that John had ever caught. He had never caught a striper before. And I don't think he caught another one for several years after that.
I don't think you need to.
Yeah. But he was one and done.
Oh man, that's sweet.
Yeah. So I never caught a striper down there. I started trout fishing down there in the 90s. And
really?
Yeah. So there was.
I was under the
different.
impression that the holdover trout was a new thing. I had no idea it'd been a thing. That's insane.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably going to make some people sad, but there's not a whole lot of holdover happening nowadays.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I know they do have some fish up near the dam where the water stays cold.
Will the striper eat them?
Well, yeah. Although there's not that many stripers in there either, because the stripers only come from Canyon Lake when there's high flow. They haven't had any high flow in a long time, so there's not any fresh stripers in there.
Interesting.
Yeah, they don't live in the river. They only get in there when they get dumped out of the lake, out of Canyon Lake. That's a striper fishery, and there's not a lot of fish holding over because the river's probably 50 CFS right now during the summer. And I think back when they had an agreement with the Water Authority. That's changed, which has made it harder for the fish to hold over. But they used to have a thing where if the lake filled up, if the lake was full, they would guarantee a minimum flow of 150 CFS is what they the scientists figured out. We need 150 CFS through the summer to keep the trout alive, I think for 10 miles. And we hadn't had 150 CFS in years. And
by design or
because the lake's so low.
Yeah,
the lake is lower than it's been since the first time they ever filled it up.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of flow. So most of the fish are going to die every year. Now the Guadalupe River Trout Unlimited chapter is the largest Trout Unlimited chapter in the nation. They've got a ton of money, so they will continue to stock it every year, and they stock some really large fish. So. Unfortunately, a lot of the big fish that you see every year are not
don't make it through. I was just wondering. Yeah.
They're freshly stocked, and I'm probably going to get roasted on the internet, but it is true. Now, and I hate to sound like the old dude, man, it was back in the old days.
In my day,
it was good. It was before the internet came. But historically, we have had years where the flow never got below 300 CFS.
Jesus.
And, we'd be fishing out there. And yes, the trout would hold over from year to year because the water was definitely colder. There was more flow. And there were just not a whole lot of people out there. Scott Graham was a guy who was probably definitely the first full-time guide on the Guadalupe River back in those days. And he was also a tarpon guide. I don't remember. I guess Scott was in South Padre or POC. Did you?
POC. Scott,
POC.
it was, if I'm not mistaken, Scott is the guy who put together the Texas tarpon tagging program.
Yes.
And I remember I got invited to that tournament.
Yeah.
But at the time, I wasn't like well versed. I just signed up and I'd gone in and I never got to fish it. But yes, I remember when all that was happening.
Yep, Scott Graham. So he split his time between guiding for trout on the Guadalupe and guiding for tarpon and redfish
That's
on
sweet.
the Texas coast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. That was in the 90s, maybe
Back
early
in my
2000s, back in my day. But it was a little bit different back then. But it's, I know a lot of the guides have sort of a love-hate relationship with it. I mean, it is still the most popular river fishery in Texas. A lot of people get introduced to fly fishing there. It's good for kids. You can take them down there and they're probably going to catch, several really nice fish. I think it's an amazing resource. And it definitely pays the bills for a lot of guides during the winter when nothing else is really happening.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I complained about it, and my wife's like, if you complaining about it, then you just need to get your ass out of there. And so I was like, you know what? You're right. So I don't complain about it anymore, and I don't do it anymore either. So, it's one of those things.
Yeah. So we are at the 1.5 hour mark. I'll do two last questions and then I end it, right? So the two questions are, first one being, looking at everything that you've done in your career, you kind of alluded to it a little bit. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently? You don't have to use the word regret. I've used to use the word regret, right? But it's just a little negative. Like just things like, I should have done this or that, just whatever.
Yeah, I really, I can't, like I said, the only thing I could say I maybe wish I would have done was just start sooner. I mean, other than that, I got no regrets. Yeah, no, it's I'm very, very fortunate to be where I'm at. So But, I could also say I wish I was 10 years younger than I am right now.
Okay, well, that doesn't count.
So whatever. Yeah, man, I got no regrets. Yeah. If I could do it all over again, the only thing I would change I would have started sooner. That's all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last question is, as if you're talking to the next generation, think, kids maybe a little bit older than your daughter, or like 14, 15, 16, maybe want to go into the fly fishing space or want to get into maybe just the outdoors space. What is a piece of advice that you'd give them going into that?
Don't be scared. Just don't be scared, man. It can be intimidating. There's a lot of stuff out there. But yeah, you just, it's kind of piggybacks on that. Don't wait, at the same thing is like, don't be scared to start. And, cause the sooner you start, the sooner you'll figure it out, the sooner you'll be comfortable with it, and the other thing that this is a lesson that I'm still trying to learn is, number one, don't be scared. Don't let fear make decisions for you. But the other one is don't be afraid to ask for help, and and if somebody offers to help you, let them help you. Don't ask for help. If people offer, let them help you. So that's the thing. Don't be scared. And when you find people out there that are willing to make it easier for you, let them do that, because it actually makes the people who want to help you feel good to help you. So, people who, and I wish I was better at that. I wish I was better at like mentoring and, getting kids out, and, it's like, I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more of a lot of things, but that's one thing that I wish I could do more. But I feel like just by doing stuff like this, I'm at least letting people know.
Even the educational stuff, like little clips and stuff. Yeah, 100%.
Just putting it out there. But because it really does. It makes me feel good. And so if somebody's out there needing some help, and somebody reaches out to you, let them help you. But at the same time, don't be scared. Reach out to people. I get random people will send me emails and go, dude, I'll sure you get 1 million emails about this or whatever. It's like, you know what, man? It's only going to take me 10 minutes to write you something that may help you out. Like I'll do it, So that's it. Just, go for it. I mean, once again, being the introverted person that I am, who has put myself out there in all kinds of different ways, which is bizarre, on stage in front of 1,000 people, like on the internet, it's just,
rapping and fly fishing in 91.
But that is definitely the times that I've put myself out there have definitely been more than worth the trouble of getting over my
fear, anxiety, hurt.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it's definitely
okay.
Definitely.
Well, that's the last question. Is there anything that I may have missed that you wanted to mention? Nothing like that?
Nah, not really. Like I said, I purposely didn't really think a lot about
me either
doing this beforehand.
That's kind of the point of it.
Yeah, just going with the flow. But I'm gonna say I want to thank you for doing this. I mean, it's fun. I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed getting to know you, and I feel good that you hopefully asked me some questions that maybe will be, worthwhile for somebody to.
I'm sure they'll be worthwhile to anybody listening to it.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, with that being said, I mean, it's hour 34. This has been awesome. I'm so glad we finally got to do it.
Me too.
I had been wanting to do it for a minute. It's a shame that my email got lost into the void, but to be fair, I'm so glad that it did, because at the time I probably wasn't as coherent in terms of being able to do these off the whim like this.
Yeah.
So I feel like the quality is a lot better now as if we had done it a year ago. So all's fair. Everything works out perfectly.
Yep.
So all we have to do left is take your portrait picture and just get on out of here, my friend.
All right. Well, I'll smile.